Thank you all so much for coming. This is a terrific event. It's part of the TIFF Higher Learning series, and today's panel is called The Rules of Engagement, Documentary Filmmaking in Canada. I'm going to talk a little bit here at the podium, and then when I get a chance to turn it over to the people you really want to hear, I'll take my seat and we'll have a wonderful conversation. We are very fortunate to have with us 4 brilliant filmmakers who have each made unique contributions to documentary and have helped push the boundaries of the genre. First, I'd like to introduce Bonnie Klein, right here. While a legendary figure in the documentary film world, Sherr Klein is a former member of Challenge for Change and Studio D, 2 pioneer programs and units within the National Film Board. Oh, that is so much better. Thank you so much for that. Now I can actually see the words I'm reading. With Challenge for Change, she directed VTR Saint-Jacques. With Studio D, Patricia's Moving Picture, and of course, Not a Love Story, which is showing later this afternoon. Following a brainstem stroke at the age of 46, Bonnie documented her recovery in the award-winning book Slow Dance and co-founded the Society for Disability Arts and Culture. Her latest documentary project, Shameless, The Art of Disability, was produced by the NFBA, and I encourage all of you to watch it. And Bonnie, it's just so good to see you again. Beside Bonnie is Harold Crooks. Harold Crooks attended McGill University, the Delhi School for Economics, and the London Film School. He has co-written for several documentary features, including The Corporation, which won the Audience Award at Sundance. His directorial debut, Surviving Progress, premiered at the festival. The Price We Pay, which screened here recently, is his second documentary feature. And I might add, Harold, as I watched it, I felt so overwhelmed in the way that good documentary should make us feel. And I thank you for that. Even as I contacted an economic prof friend and said, "Is this true?" He said it was, so I wasn't. And then beside Harold is Elle-Máijá Tailfeathers. Maya is an emerging filmmaker, actor, and writer. She is Blackfoot from the Kainai First Nation. Did I pronounce that correctly? Not even remotely? I should have asked before. I apologize. How should I pronounce it?
Ghana.
Ghana.
Or the Blood Reserve in English.
Yeah. Ghana First Nation, as well as Sami from Northern Norway. How'd I do with that one? Better, yay me.
Yeah.
She was recently presented with the 2014 Vancouver Mayor's Arts Award for her work as an emerging filmmaker. Her directing credits include the shorts Bloodland, A Red Girl's Reasoning, and Bihttoš. I was practicing that in the green room. And that's screening tonight. And I urge all of you to go see it tonight. It is just a beautiful collage of documentary and autobiography. And finally, Candy Fox is from the, I'm going to mangle this as well, I really apologize, the Payapot? Payapot.
Yeah.
First Nation in Saskatchewan, and is currently completing her BFA in film production at the University of Regina. She's directed several documentary shorts, including Being Too Spirited, which won the Best Documentary at the Living Skies Student Film Festival, Brown Rock Woman, The Soul Within, and Backroads, which is also screening tonight. So thank you, Candy, and please extend our thank yous to Camilla Stonechild for helping to break through the silence of domestic abuse. So, I was asked by the organizers to provide a 10-minute overview of the history of documentary filmmaking in Canada. I laughed when they asked me to do this, and then I realized they were serious. So, I'm not going to waste any more of my 600 seconds. And here we go. And being a good Canadian, I will apologize in advance to everyone and everything I miss in my drive-through documentary filmmaking. Early documentary filmmaking in Canada, like all filmmaking, is closely tied to the history of the National Film Board of Canada. As the NFB's own website candidly notes, John Grierson, the original and powerful figure of director of the NFB, wanted to make the NFB a powerful propaganda tool for the government. Scholars such as Ted Magder, Michael Dorland, Joyce Nelson, and others note that this emphasis on documentary filmmaking was both ideological and economic. With the cinematic powerhouse to the south, feature fiction filmmaking would be too costly and upset the existing distribution market. Now, too often that history is written in a note of failure, at least it was when I was going through my university days and reading Magder and Dorland and Nelson. But I would contend to you all today that the emphasis on documentary has given us a rich, multi-layered tapestry of cinematic innovations married to deep political, spiritual, and social consciousness. Far from being agents of propaganda, our early documentary filmmakers set the tone of inquiry and expression to the most marginalized voices and spaces in the country. Nowhere is this more evident than in the groundbreaking style of direct cinema, which became a hallmark of the NFB in the 1960s. Direct cinema took the camera out of the studio and onto location. Michel Brault, who died just a little over a year ago, September 2013, is recognized as a pioneer in this style, bringing with it a clear political vision. Of course, the NFB was not the only place where documentary filmmakers could test the boundaries of the genre. Direct cinema was also a hallmark of the CBC's Candid Eye series in 1958. Director Alan King's first documentary, Skid Row, began a nearly two-decade relationship with the Mother Corps. I think he actually went even longer. That also included independently made documentary hybrid films such as A Married Couple. How many people have seen A Married Couple? You should see A Married Couple. It's A Married Couple, I will also note, is the subject of a fascinating book by Zoe Druick, now my research partner, so shameless plug time, in the Canadian Cinema series published by the University of Toronto Press. By the late 60s, political and artistic ferment helped fuel the Challenge for Change Société Nouvelle series within the NFB. Challenge for Change and Société Nouvelle was an effort to, again, let's get cinema out of the studios and out onto the streets and in with the people. And we have one of the members of Challenge for Change right here with us, Bonnie Klein, a pioneer in the program. Working under John Kameny and George Stoney, Bonnie was one among many filmmakers pushing out into the most geographically remote and economically marginalized communities in Canada, collaborating on film projects while teaching members of those communities important production skills. Films such as Introduction to Fogo Island by Colin Lowe in 1967, Bonnie's own Bihttoš Saint-Jacques, were, to quote my colleague Brian Rusted, multi-sensory performances of the process of social change. In 1974, emboldened by the success of her Working Mother series with Challenge for Change, Kathleen Shannon was able to launch Studio D, the first national film studio for women within the National Film Board of Canada. While not only documentaries were produced, the genre was central to its mission of speaking to and about women's experiences and to reach out and connect with communities far outside the realm of cinema. Bonnie's own Not a Love Story in 1981, and Flamenco at 5:15 and Forbidden Love 1992. These are just a few of the award-winning and groundbreaking documentary films produced by Studio D. And Candy, I have to say, watching Backroads, I saw the resonances, the legacies of Studio D, but I see a whole direction forward with your clear-eyed vision, and it's so lovely to see that trajectory. So the days of institution building have waned, and in its stead is a steady rise of independent, international collaborations and co-production documentary filmmakers. This has always been the case, as in the aforementioned work by Alan King, or importantly, Hookers on Davy by Holly Dale and Janice Cole, that had support from NFB and Studio D, but was also independent. Still, as public funding becomes less stable and more project-oriented, and as new international markets thirst for content, the parameters of documentary filmmaking have changed dramatically. Festivals, television series, specialty cable, web streaming, documentary media installation, these are but of a few of the ways that documentary film has stretched the limits of its potential. Watching Bihttoš, I felt energized and excited to think of what lies ahead for us artistically. Yet the deep ethical and political commitments of documentary are never far behind, as Harold Crooks so forcefully demonstrates. So our modes of engagement have changed dramatically. Our desire to see ourselves through multiple lenses, to scrutinize who we are and what we can be, is what makes documentary such a crucial tool of education, activism, but most of all, imagination. I look forward to hearing from our guests today about their vision, their struggles, and their continuing commitment to documentary film. Thanks, everyone.
All right, so thank you, everyone, and we will have some time, I hope, for questions from the audience. I just want to open up with just a broad-based question for all four of you, to ask if you could just discuss a little bit about your own documentary practice. And Candy, why don't we start with you and move that way, and then we'll come back the other way around.
Okay. Wow, let's see. Documentary practice. Well, I'm still a student. I'm still figuring out my practice, but I've come a long way since my first year, where I knew absolutely nothing about what I was doing when I was, filming something. And now there's not so much as like I have a certain practice that I use every time, but it's more like when I film something, I know the steps to take in order to find the story from what I've shot, and what I need to do in order to structure that story and get something meaningful out of it. And so that involves for me shooting, of course, and finding the story. Well, beforehand, you're finding the story from your subject, and you're making a connection with them. And for my film Backroads, Camelia and I are very close, so that was a bonus that I was able to. It's a very difficult subject to discuss because it's not something you talk about every day. The film is about the destruction of her family due to sexual abuse, and and it's finding that connection with that person, and finding them what do they want to share by telling their story with this film. What is their hopes? Because obviously they agreed to do the film for a certain reason, right? And you want to respect that. And I really wanted to respect that when I was making this film. And and from then on, it's very technical. It's for me transcribing my whatever I shot with them, my interviews, and finding the moments in there that are really meaningful, and piecing that together. And then the artistic side comes into it of putting the shots that you took and the locations and things like that. And just the music is a big thing, right? It's like once you have that, I think it feels so full, and it comes to life, because you're taking people to another place. It's like you're bringing them into the story, and you're creating emotion with music, and it adds to the power of the story, and you want to find the right music for that. So it's a big question to answer, I think.
In 3 minutes or less.
So I'll just pass that along now to
I think you touched on some really important issues around, conversations with the subject, and then, crafting and structuring a story, and then bringing cinematic techniques to make it alive. Thank you for that. Maija.
Thanks. Talgomunalkin praegu loed ollukihtu teen puhkadi maita ja den olumokien etnan luondu milet täällä on TIFF. I just wanted to say thank you to everyone that's here today, and it's an honor to be on this panel with all of you, especially after that introduction. And I just wanted to acknowledge the Indigenous territory that we are on today, and thank you to TIFF for organizing this event. So I wouldn't necessarily say I'm really a documentary filmmaker. I've made two, and the second one, Bihttoš, was a commission by the Imaginative Film Festival, and it was part of a project called the Embargo Collective. So myself and a number of 5 other First Nations filmmakers workshopped for a week, and it was inspired by Lars von Trier's The Five Obstructions. So we were meant to sort of place these bizarre restrictions on each other in an effort to step out of our creative comfort zones. And we decided to draw names from a hat because we all loved each other's work so much. So I drew Lisa Jackson's name, and the group challenged me to do my own version of her film Suckerfish, which was this deeply personal, offbeat documentary about her relationship with her mother. And I was just like, dear God, this is the most terrifying thing I'll ever have to do. And it was honestly the most difficult year of my life, professionally and personally, having to go through this process. So I guess in having done these 2 films, there's a code of ethics you have to follow, and there's moral responsibilities as filmmakers and as storytellers. And as an Indigenous person, I feel that my work is always inherently rooted in Indigenous stories and Indigenous struggles and politics, and the personal is always political. So in saying that, there is this strong responsibility to my people, to my communities, to the subjects that I'm working with. And in Bihttoš, it's a story about my family, and in particular my father and my relationship with him. So throughout that process, it was about continually consulting with my family and making sure that I wasn't going too far, and making sure that I was respecting, the relationship between us, which is sacred, and it's something that needs to be respected. So yeah, I guess what I'm trying to say is that respect is probably the most critical aspect of documentary filmmaking for your subjects and for yourself. And yeah, I think that's really all I have to say about that.
I've got one here.
Yeah. Yeah, so Harold, thank you so much, Maya. I think that really follows on a lot of what Candy was saying. Harold.
Well, first of all, Rebecca, thank you for that very generous introduction, and thank you to TIFF for the wonderful recognition that it's offered both to Surviving Progress a few years ago and now The Price We Pay. For me, one of the most daunting things about embarking on those 2 particular films is the fact that they're issue films, and therefore they don't naturally give themselves to the personal and make them particularly challenging as such. And when you pose this question to us, Rebecca, you set up a number of dichotomies that you wanted us to consider, and the one that I focused on was the aesthetics analytic dichotomy, and it immediately made me think of a rebranding process that's going on at Sundance that some of you that's been widely commented upon. The new director of the Sundance documentary program has committed herself to creating what she calls a 3rd pillar for Sundance. The first pillar having been a concentration on human rights films, and then the second pillar being a focus on social justice films. And now she wants to, feeling that documentarians who are making art films have been given the short end of the stick, and more space has to be created within documentary making culture for films that are less focused on issues than aesthetics. And in thinking about that, it made me think that that all those three pillars, when all is said and done, have a commonality to them, and it was certainly the case in these two issue-based films that I was involved in, and that is that aesthetics was certainly never excluded. And in fact, there was always the sense that in making such heavy issue-based films, the surviving progress being about nothing less than the survival of civilization, and the second one, the recent one, about the survival of democracy, there was still the very, very strong sense that these had to be cinematic experiences. And point one, and so that there wasn't this sense, the feeling, it was almost the sense that it would be a false dichotomy to say you have either a choice of making an art film, an aesthetic film, or an issue film. There was the sense that they must be married to each other in order for them to speak to as wide an audience as possible. And then parallel to that, or is the sense that even in big picture issue films, you have to find a story. You have to tell people a story. And so an enormous amount of effort went into finding the story about the last 15 years of urban civilization, or even going back farther than that to what was specific to the nature of our species, and taking the story of that species up to a point where the species has become capable of taking over the evolution itself at the very moment when it seems possible to be doing itself in, and what an extraordinary cosmic irony that is. And then also the price we pay also has a story that begins with the collapse of the British Empire and takes us today to how the offshoring of the world's wealth is imperiling the major social innovations of the 20th century, the middle class and social democracy, but telling it as a story. And the only other thing that these two last films they also have in common is removing the directorial voiceover, the directorial voice, and painstakingly trying to weave together a story through the voices of the participants, and choosing participants that took very, very different points of view to the subject matter, and somehow trying to make a coherent, compelling story without one's own voice, the voice of God kind of thing. So I think that would kind of describe my practice.
And Bonnie, thank you so much.
Wow. Thank you, guys. This is really interesting. And thanks to TIFF, and thanks to all of you for coming for this, what sounded like a kind of academic panel, but I think it's really not. So you've heard, I think I have the longest practice, and since 1963, and it kind of, Rebecca has given a good history, so I won't repeat my own part of that. But I came to documentary film from kind of two streams. One was that I was a high school teacher, so I kind of had the didactic or analytical message trajectory, and the other was that I was an actor. So I was interested in the aesthetic or performative part of it. And I was also an activist in the civil rights and anti-war movements. So documentary came along, and particularly NFB films and direct cinema, and it seemed to tie it all together and be a way of combining it all. So I guess I've spent my life trying to do that. So I guess I'm really I can't think of a better word than gratified, but that sounds very pompous. I'm pleased that the younger members of this panel are so continuing and expanding the traditions. I was interested in things that Candy had to say about respecting the subject and honoring the fact that our whoever agrees to be in our documentary films are really sharing a big piece of their life. And we can talk about that more when we talk about Not a Love Story this afternoon in spades. And the other thing that Maya said about the personal is political, because that's certainly my documentary practice. At the beginning, I was making films about others, and I was really interested in giving voice to the people who hadn't had a voice or representation on screen, and that's what Challenge for Change was about. And ultimately, giving them the power, in fact, to make their own media, which predated the days when people could do that so handily as they do today with digital media. Now I've lost the thread of that. Come back to that. So, but then my films, with the onset of the women's movement in parallel with Studio D, the films became not about another, but about myself as a woman. And as you see in the beginning of Not a Love Story, it really started with going to a corner drugstore with Naomi when she was about 9, and a Max Milk, and being surrounded by the tits and ass magazines that I had always just not even consciously avoided, but just blotted out of my vision, but suddenly having a moment of seeing them through the eyes of a 9-year-old daughter and wondering what that could be about. And that precipitated the whole research of interrogating what that was about. So we'll talk about that later. But I guess the biggest thing I would like to say is that after my filmmaking career was obviously disrupted for 18 years, and then I had a chance I decided to make a film that I felt I was in a unique position to make. Again, this is personal, which was a film about disability art, because I was one of the few, actually there are many more now, but at the time, filmmakers, people who had the skill of filmmaking, who had significant disability. So I felt that, this was a film I could make from the inside, and I could tell my own story, not just, give the camera and microphone to somebody else to tell their story. But I wanted to share it. And this is the thing I miss most, and that I wanted to share with you all and the panel and the audience about being no longer making documentaries, is the collaborative part of it, just the working with the crews and the subjects in the films. So Shameless is a film that I made with 4 other artists with disabilities. And it set out to be collaborative, and everybody in the film got to tell me how they would like to be filmed, what the scenes in their lives were important to them, what they would like to be seen doing, and then they got to see their own part of the film as well as the whole film in progress as it was edited, and decide, as it evolved, how they felt about their representation. What did I want to say about that? Sorry. It it'll come back to me. Oh, the personal is political. Okay. So there was a shared language or culture among us as people with disabilities. And the political points or the issues and messages that we would like to have surface. But there was also, because everyone was an artist, you know, we were conscious of the way we wanted to present that. So things came out in a very, I mean, it's, some people think it's non-political, and I think the film wasn't, it wasn't widely received. It wasn't a big festival pick because people kind of expected a hard-hitting expose political film about disability rights because of previous films I'd made, like Not a Love Story, and because those were the films that were kind of hot, you know, at the time, political films. And this film is what I would call gently subversive because it didn't, you know, nail it that way. It went about, but I'm rambling. I don't want to talk anymore. But anyway, it's my favorite film of my films.
Thank you all. What terrific introductions, and you know, parsing out all the unique contours of when it comes down to documentary filmmaking. And Maya, I really appreciated how you talked about how you're not sure if that is your identity. You're still allowed to stay on the stage. But following up on what a number of you talked about your engagements with the subject, your structuring out of the story, you're finding an issue that needs to be addressed, but needs to be addressed cinematically. I really appreciated that comment, especially Harold. One of the things that I find very interesting about documentary, one of the reasons why I enjoy it, watching it so much, is the serendipities that happen. You know, that documentary filmmaking happens in the moment. Yes, I don't want to suggest that nothing is ever scripted, but things happen on camera, or things happen off camera in the process of making the film that will change the story and require a whole new set of attentions, or will affect the way the film returns to the editing suite. So I'm wondering, with that idea of filmmaking in the moment, if each of you could talk about what would have been the most challenging moment that you've had so far as a filmmaker. Again, I ask these really simple questions that can be wrapped up in 2 minutes, where something happened in the moment and the film, the structure of the film, the story of the film, the aesthetics of the film needed to change, needed to respond to that change. Maybe we'll actually start with Harold, since Bonnie just spoke, and I don't want to make Candy have to go first every time. So we'll go Harold down here, and Bonnie, you okay to go last again? Thank you.
Is this on? Yeah. All of a sudden, I hadn't thought of this for many years, but I remember on the first documentary I was ever involved in, which is called The World is Watching, which is a film about mass media coverage of the period of the revolutionary and counter-revolutionary period in Central America in the 80s. And I had, as chance would have it, my neighbor in Montreal was Peter Raymond. And so I got to know Peter and would attend his weekly screenings on Rue Guilbeault in Montreal. And then he moved to Toronto, and I had just finished a book and was looking for a new challenge. And I asked Peter whether he'd like to make a film about mass media coverage of the Sandinista Revolution, et cetera, and he said, sure. And so in the fullness of time, we put together the project. And I remember one day being in San Salvador at a very trying moment when a leftist political leader was returning to San Salvador, and the question was, whether he was going to be murdered or not. And it was very stressful, and the world media was there, et cetera, et cetera. And one morning, Peter, over breakfast, he looked at me and he said, "Harold, do you know what documentary filmmaking is?" And I said, "Well, what is it, Peter?" And he said, "It's waking up every morning with 500 problems." Anyways, I thought that was a pretty interesting definition of documentaries. In terms of my most fascinating memory of a most fascinating challenge was during, and I'll try to tell this story quickly, during the making of Surviving Progress, as I said, this big picture story that had taken on nothing less than the survival or not of urban civilization. The question was, well, how in the world are we going to resolve this film? How are we going to end it? What are we going to say? What's going to be the takeaway? And in the course of researching the film, someone told me about this contrarian historian of technology at the University of Manitoba, this Czech-Canadian Václav Smil, someone who was respected across the political spectrum, from, and who was a favorite energy expert of Bill Gates's. And so I kind of read a bit about what Václav Smil had to say, and I realized it's through his point of view that we can resolve this film. So I called him at the University of Manitoba, and he said, "Forget about it." He said, "If you want to know what I think, read my books." He said, "I've had film crews here before. They take up a lot of my time. They either, then when I see what they've done, they either have used almost none of it or they get it wrong." So, well, that was very discouraging, and I didn't have a quick comeback, but I was very, very determined to get Václav in the film. So, and I realized that he was a bit of an old world kind of contrarian character, so I decided to write him a letter. And I wrote him a 3-page, single-spaced letter, and I decided it would be better not to email it to him, just to mail it to him. And I don't know, 10 days later, the phone rings, and it's this guy with this Czech accent, and he said, "I've never received a letter like that in my life." He said, "Well, what do you want me to do?" I said, "Well, we want to interview you." And he said, "Well, when?" He said, "Okay, I'll do it." When the time came, I phoned him to prepare for the interview, and he said, "I'm sorry, I'm going to Japan, I can't do it." Okay, so then that was in, I don't remember whether it was in pre-production or early in production. So then now we're in post-production. This is like a year or more later. And one night, I'm just trolling on the internet, and I come across a talk or an interview that on stage that Václav Smil did at the Perimeter Institute at the University of Waterloo, this high-powered physics whatever institute. And I listened to him and I said, "Oh my God, we've got to get this. Václav's got to be in the film." So I just picked up the phone and I phoned him, and I never met the gentleman, but I said, "Václav, it's me again. You've got to be in this film." And he said, "Well," and he said to me, "Well, I can't because we've just had a fire at the University of Manitoba and my office is burned." So then I said, "Václav, we'll rent a hotel room in downtown Winnipeg." He said, "When do you want to come?" I said, "We'll be there in 48 hours. So we came, and even when he came into the lobby of the hotel, he was grumbling. He said, "I don't know why I'm doing this." Anyways, we got him upstairs. Once the camera was rolling, he wouldn't shut up. And anyway, the long and short of it is, for all the young and aspiring filmmakers in the room, is you just never, never, never give up. And when the film finally was a reality, whether it was in Barrie, Ontario, or Dubai, or wherever, Václav was the favorite character in the film. So I guess there's a lesson there of some kind.
Máijá.
What was the question again?
Yes. The question is to talk about a challenge that you found on set, this problem of trying to make films in the moment and realizing that you just have to switch gears or double down. I'm not quite sure. I think Harold kind of did both. Yeah.
Well, Bihttoš was scripted. I mean, it's told in 3 acts. The first act is animated. It's narrated by a little girl speaking Sami, which is my first language. And then the second act is we shot on 35 millimeter, and I cast actors to play my parents and a teen actor to play myself. And then the third act we shot on a red, and I had the same actor playing my father, and I played myself, which was very strange. And I went to Sápmi, I went to Norway, and I visited my father this fall, and I shot a lot of the additional footage for the third act of the film. And I guess, in creating the first and the second act, I experienced a lot of the things you experience making narrative film, which is you basically have to prepare for the worst any day on set, and we definitely had a lot of mishaps. But I guess what was so, in terms of working in the moment and documentary, first of all, I drafted the script so many times, and I remember sending the first rough draft to my parents and just being absolutely terrified about what they were going to think, because it's a very personal story. It may not come across as super risky, but it is risky to tell your family's story. So, oh, well, thank you. So it was sending that first rough draft to them was terrifying. I didn't sleep that night, and finally, my dad takes a long time to respond to emails, and so he finally wrote me back a week later, and I was just like in total sheer panic mode by that moment. And he said, he was happy with it, and that his only request was that he wouldn't have to participate in making the film, which is a totally reasonable thing to ask. And he recognized the value in making the film. So I went and visited him, and we kind of redid this road trip that I talk about in the film. So we went and we drove all over the place for, I think 11 days, and we didn't fight once, which was amazing. I mean, to be in a car with your parent for over 10 days and not have a single argument is, I think, pretty impressive. But there were a few moments. One was that I had made the decision not to show any sort of pictures or visuals of the Sami boarding school that my father attended. In Norway, they had something called fornorsking, or the Norwegianization process, where Sami children were forced to go to boarding school, and a very similar history to the Indian residential school system here. So I had made the decision not to show any photos or any visuals of the school. I thought it didn't need to be there. But my father and I went to a funeral when I was there this fall, and when we were driving back from the funeral, he pulled the car over and he's like, "Did you want to film the school?" And I was like, "Oh, I guess. Where is it?" He's like, "It's right over there." So I got my camera out of the trunk, and I'd forgotten to bring the tripod. So it was freezing cold outside. I was dressed for a funeral, and I had a skirt on, and I think I was wearing heels, and so I was like running through the marshy tundra to get a decent shot of this old boarding school. So it's you'll see it's very shaky. So that was a very surprising moment for me, and it was kind of surreal to revisit the school with my father, and for him just to kind of stop the car like that and say, "Okay, well, there it is." And so I learned more about his history and that experience. And then I guess, what was the second thing? So also in the third act, there's footage of my father. So it transitions from this actor footage to my real father. And when we were on this road trip, we got a call from a family friend who said, "Hey, do you want to go to Moldavotna tomorrow?" Moldavotna was like this very important place to us growing up. We went fishing and camping there almost every weekend. It's a place where my happiest childhood memories are in this place. So she called and said, "I'll take you out on my fishing boat tomorrow if you guys want to go." So we went, and then that day my father let me film him. So I after him having said, my only request is that I don't have to participate or be in front of the camera that day, I didn't ask. He just let me film him, and then I asked, is it okay if I include some of this footage in the film, and he gave me his blessing. So I guess getting all this sort of surprise bonus footage was good, and I think it definitely changes the visual impact of the story and the film.
Oh yeah, it absolutely does. Thank you for that. It's really beautiful. That how making a film and bringing the camera in. We always talk, how the camera distances and objectifies, and here the camera brought you together and brought a deeper honesty, and it so shines through in the film. Candy.
Let's see. Well, with my film that's being screened this evening, Backroads, it's about the destruction of the family and the family life of Camilla Stonechild due to sexual abuse and family abuse that occurred a few years back. So it's a very personal story, and coming into it, I initially wanted to do an experimental film about the subjective experience of what Camilla still goes through. She still has nightmares, and certain things still bother her about that. And you didn't really see anything like that, so I wanted to capture that somehow. But when I started filming it, and then I was like, it was my fourth year final project, so I was showing things to my classmates and my professor, and as I began to watch it myself and talk about it more with them, I realized that this story needed much more in order to get the whole story across, and to give it that respect that the story needed, and also because the message that is within the story needed to come across better than an experimental would have did. So with that initial footage that I had to go back and shoot other things, and then I had to figure out how to find this story with these two different types of shots that I was taking. So I ended up using her internal monologue and the things that we shot that discussed what she was experiencing, with the more traditional documentary elements with it, and the interview and the shots on locations and things like that. So that was a big challenge, just to find the story within it. And I was like, I was freaking out at home and just like, well, how am I going to make a story from this? It was these very dark images that were experimental, and then figuring out how to, put it together, piece it together with the classical, head and shoulders shots and from the interview. So that was a really huge challenge. And then I found out that I needed to just stray away from both of my ideas of what these two types of films should be, and make it cohesive with what they are together, and just finding, like, I don't know, just, being creative and being different and thinking outside of the box. And so I ended up using both of that. So it worked really well. And I think another big challenge too was just during the interview process, like I said before, it's not something that you discuss every day. So it's trying to be really sensitive to that issue, and respectful, and the interview process was very challenging for me, because I think more so it's my own, because I'm sensitive about the issue, and I don't want to disrespect her story in any way or ask questions that are insensitive, or be insensitive about it. So, but I just want to thank her. She's actually in the audience right now, so. Does she want to stand? I don't know. Probably not. She's shy, but yeah, I just want to thank her for that. So, for sharing her story.
For those who haven't seen the film, I do urge you to see it. And yes, I won't draw attention to Camilla unless she wants it. But there's enormous bravery on her part, and I will say a really really amazing natural relationship with the camera. That was really impressive, and is credit to both you as a filmmaker and to Camilla as a subject. And yeah, I imagine that the challenges, there was no one big challenge making that film, but just every day. Yeah. Just always.
Yeah, for sure. And it's, I don't know, we didn't expect all of this, so it's really great that this film is going to be seen by more people, because initially Camilla uploaded her story to Facebook where it was shared, and she connected with a lot of people, so that was her initial, that's what she wanted to get out of this, and to share this story for people who are unable to share their story, their experiences with sexual abuse, because there's still that social stigma, that fear, and the repercussions from coming forward with your story. So she wanted to be that person to give voice to those people. So very brave of her. Yes, thank her.
Absolutely. Yeah. If you don't mind, I'll pause also on this story. There's a moment in the film where Camilla asks, "Can we stop? Can we go?" And I thought it was a really brave and important decision to actually keep that moment in the film, to not edit it just before the request, because I think that also says something about this process of filmmaking and documentary filmmaking, where it's like, can we stop? Well, can we not? I can't go any further, and that was really an important moment in the film. Bonnie, have you had a few challenges during your career?
Great stories. Picking up on this, the question of exposure. One of the working titles of Shameless was "Exposing Ourselves." Catherine. One of our unspoken aims of the film was not to be voyeuristic and not to be medical and clinical about disability, just live our lives and we were feeling quite upbeat about all this. And then we came to Toronto to film Catherine Frazee, one of the people in the film, who's a writer and human rights activist, but her art is her writing. And she is significantly disabled. And she chose, among the scenes she wanted to be filmed in, is sharing the screen with a bunch of younger artists that she had kind of nurtured as professor at Ryerson and very active in disability arts. So she was supposed to MC this evening of that was going to be a major film in the scene. And we were all staying in the same hotel, and we received a phone call in the middle of the night, because my husband Michael is a physician, that Catherine was very, very sick. So we rushed to her room. It was a big. She was very sick, and luckily we were all there. So the camera was in a nearby room. We called the camera. We had established a close enough relationship that there was no problem coming into her room. When Michael was seeing her. We all went with the camera. We went to the emergency room. We followed Catherine in the emergency room in the hospital, as well as going to the scene where she was supposed to be but wasn't, and filming that. And anyway, and one of the nice things that happened, besides that she survived, is that the film ended up exposing the very real vulnerability of people living with disabilities, without focusing on that. That's all I'll say.
Yeah, that's such a powerful, powerful moment in Shameless, and so just very brave and honest of Catherine. In that moment where very real medical issues are taking place, she's, again, she's very cognizant of the camera. Yeah, and I'd also point out, Bonnie, with that example, that in Shameless, Bonnie, you yourself put yourself on the line. The scene that I always have the trouble with is when you fall, and we just hear like her calling for Michael, and then you're fine, but it's the same. But it's
yes.
Yeah, but and so there's doing a film around disability. There are really fraught challenges with the bodies. So thank you all very much. Let me take a look at the time. I have to play a little dance with my eyesight here. All right, I'm going to ask one last final question, and then I hope we do have some time for some questions from the floor. And so, well, we opened with a question about documentary practice, and then about the challenges of your documentary practice. What are some of the great challenges that you've had as an artist? So now I'm going to ask yet another question that can be easily answered in a couple of minutes, which is, when I've asked you to explain your documentary practice, what definition of documentary practice came into your head? What do you think that means? We're hearing a lot these days about practice. And I'm curious, what does that mean to you when you talk about documentary practice? Maya, can I maybe start with you? Or not?
Sure. Actually, no, I don't want to start. Can one of you please
Good
start?
for you. I'm always so happy when panelists just like, nope, give me a moment. Harold, how about we start with you then? Yeah.
Well, I began, I'll just try to do this briefly. I began by talking about these three pillars that were identified by the new director at Sundance, the human rights, social justice, and then I haven't seen your two films, and I very much hope to see them before I leave, but they sound more like they're in the area of the third dimension of being films that are, although once again, this is the false dichotomy, because in listening to both of you, you've made profoundly artistic films, but they are about political. They're about issues. They're about issues that you're putting forward for our consideration. So I come back to this thing that no matter what the category of a documentary we're talking about, you always come back to storytelling. Then the question is, in terms of the difference between fiction and nonfiction film, is, as a storyteller, what are the limits to, as a nonfiction filmmaker, what are the limits to that you're prepared to carry a story to, in terms of telling a good story? And what one always comes up against is that, you kind of have an idea, well, you have more than kind of have an idea in casting your documentary. Who are the good guys and who are the bad guys? But the problem in terms of telling the story that you want to tell is when the bad guys start expressing what for you are inconvenient truths. Well, how do you integrate that into your project? In order to be ethical and moral at every level, including towards the supposed bad guys. And the lesson that I've learned by confronting that issue is that by confronting the issue, you take the film inevitably to into a more compelling zone for audiences, a more truthful zone. And by wrestling with those complexities, you make a more honest film, and therefore your film is more necessary. So I don't know if that's exactly an answer to your question, but...
It's your answer, therefore it is.
Oh,
I thought it was fantastic. I really appreciate that, Harold. Yeah, and I think it's important for us to think, about dichotomies or dialectics or dialogics. I prefer to think in the latter two terms. Candy, did you have something you wanted to add?
I wasn't really positive what the question was.
Oh, right, you weren't here. Sorry. Well, just go anyway. No. How about I ask Bonnie and I'll frame the question back to you. Thanks, Bonnie. We're going to try and wrap up to make sure we have plenty of time for questions, I promise.
Okay, then I won't talk long. I love what you said about complexity. I won't address the question of practice, except that I think it implies evolution. Like we don't have the answers. We're practicing. Yeah, I think that's all. Oh, the other thing I wanted to say, just as part of this whole discussion, is that I think what I've come to feel is that documentary film is not the right medium for intellectual analysis and discussion. It's very awkward, and I'm not trying to say. I mean, I think there are other media that are more appropriate. I think what documentaries should do is what it can do that other media cannot do, and that is speak to the heart and the emotions, which is, I think, what we mean when we say we're introducing or making sure to address the aesthetic, to address those intellectual issues in an artistic practice.
That sounded beautiful. Thank you. So, Maija, having listened to Harold and Bonnie, I don't know if that makes you feel more empowered to speak or more intimidated with such great answers, but I know you'll have something wonderful to say.
Yeah, I'm definitely more intimidated now. Well, I consider myself a storyteller, and it really comes down to the story and what you choose to reveal and what you choose not to. And I mean, documentary is so often regarded as something that is purely nonfiction, but it isn't. I mean, in my case, I mean, there's plenty of moments in the film where, it's just my voice. It's the story from my perspective, which is, it starts off with that of a 6-year-old girl, and her experience is very different from that of, my parents at that time. So, though it is nonfiction, it is fiction in many ways. So yeah, it's about creating a story, recognizing what needs to be revealed and what doesn't need to be revealed. And I guess for me, it was also recognizing that your audience, your viewers, they're smart people, and giving them credit, giving them the ability to make decisions for themselves, and decide, what they wanted to hear and what they don't want to hear, I guess. Yeah. So it's a relationship too. I'm just rambling now.
No. But I think I'm glad you brought in the audience. It's the filmmaker, it's the subject in film, and it's the audience that also needs to be respected. That's, I think, a really important part of documentary. Candy, do you want to have the final say before we go out to the audience?
Sure. For me, it means a lot of things, of course, but coming from my own perspective, I'm an Indigenous filmmaker. It's been a way for me to tell my stories, share my stories with the world. And from what I've seen from other Indigenous filmmakers, it's the same thing. And it's getting stories out there that wouldn't necessarily be heard by a wider audience, and with people of other cultures and things like that. So it's a way to get our voice heard. It's a way to assert our agency. And it's a form of expression. And for me, it's been what I share is typically rooted in my community and rooted in where I come from and my family. My grandmother is my biggest role model. So, like I made a film about her, how she got her Indian name, like things that you typically wouldn't hear. And I'm proud to share those stories. And yeah, I think that's, for me, documentary is just, it's about giving to people a part of who you are as a person and what you're passionate about.
Thank you all very, very much. I'd like to thank our panelists for their profound insights, and so maybe a round of applause before we take it out to the audience.
What advice would you give amateur documentary filmmakers who might, succumb to the temptation to cut the film a certain way that, might make it a better film, might improve a pacing problem, but it would falsify or sort of skew, the real experience, what you were going through in an actual production of it? What sort of psychological techniques do you use to sort of keep yourself on track and sort of keep the narrative instincts in check? For all of you.
Well, I mean, that's not a choice that one has really between a good story and falsification. I mean, falsification is a non-starter. I mean, just to repeat myself, I think you take the inconvenient truth that you're presented with as a kind of way of forcing you into making your film more profound, and in that way it has to be a better story. I mean, and a more useful tool for the world.
Thank you. I see a hand up, and I'm pointing, and a microphone's on its way. Yep, there we go. Thank you.
Hi, guys. Thank you so much for coming and imparting your wisdom on us. I have a question mostly for Maya and Candy, but if anyone else has anything to add, that would be great. I'm working on a documentary right now that's about my family and their story, so it's obviously a very personal story. One of the things they always tell us is to be careful and not to beware of the dangers of being so close to your subject. So how have you guys been able to kind of straddle that line and come out with something that both your audience and you can be proud of?
This works okay. Well, that's a really great question. I think one of the most challenging aspects of making Bihttoš was to tell my family's story and my story in with a narrative structure, to actually story edit my life and my family's life. But I had some wonderful mentors and people to collaborate with. Danis Goulet, who kind of made the whole Embargo Collective happen at Imaginative. She was the executive producer, and she gave some wonderful feedback about creating a story arc and a structure. Because when you're so when you're so close to the subjects, when it is your story, it's so hard to pull yourself out of that, and also not. I mean, it's impossible not to get emotionally involved. Like I said, this was one of the most challenging years of my life personally. Like I think I calculated the hours of sleep I lost making this film, and it was like it was just insane. And I'm still healing from having made that film. I mean, it opened up a lot of wounds, and but it was also very cathartic for my family. I mean, they were the first ones to see the film beyond, my producers and the team that actually worked on creating it, and that was critical for me, was to have a screening for my family before anybody else saw it, and something that that was really important to me was, obviously what my family thought of it. I really don't care what anybody else thinks of the film, as long as my family is happy with it, and as long as I feel like that I did our story justice, and that I didn't do more damage than good in making the story. And as Candy said, it's critical for us as Indigenous filmmakers to be creating Indigenous content and creating stories from our own voice, because for so long our stories have been appropriated and sort of misused, and it's really important that we're creating space for Indigenous stories. And yeah, I think that's really all I have to say, is just be careful and be good to yourself, and make sure that you're communicating with your family throughout the process. And it's never going to be what you really imagined it to be. And also, I guess one more thing is, again, what you choose to reveal and what you choose not to is key. Because sometimes some things are just better left unsaid.
Yeah, and just to add to what Maya said, I think finding like what you really want to reveal and what you don't, because some things like think of your film as an idea, an open-ended like question, or like the answer, not the answer. You don't want to give all of the answer away. You want to inspire some thought from the audience as well. But I think what's best to think about is just losing all of my train of thought here, is not to really think about what other people are telling you, but because I think you'll know when your story hits home. You'll know it yourself, and you'll have that feeling, and like, don't go too much on what people are telling you. Like, don't get too close to your subject, because you know your relationship with them. You know what part of what they're saying is important and what you need to share, and so you'll know. But also, keep in mind what she said is like, just share what their opinion of the film is too is very important. So yeah.
Thank you both. Really, really important. Sorry. I saw the red light, but I didn't see the person. Thanks. Sorry about that.
This will be a question from an audience perspective. I see a lot of documentaries. I go to Hot Docs and Doc Soup, and it's a sort of an outside the film question, and it may relate more to issue films than to personal films, but I noticed that when I have the great privilege of hearing the director or producer or the subject afterwards, that I hear things that are immensely important to my understanding of the film. Lots of good questions get answered. Sometimes it's practical, factual information that puts something into perspective, and I often think that the people who see the film without that extra added value are missing important things. I don't know if there's a way that you can think of to add to the film's experience, whether it's having a website or having interviews of the characters that go beyond the film and are additional material that might be available somewhere. But I'm wondering about your opinions about that, especially following on the discussion of choices about what to put in the film and what not to put in the film. I understand some of those are never going to be answered and shouldn't be, but they're often things that are extraordinarily important. And I could give examples, but I hope I've asked it well enough.
Well, Bonnie, I'm going to ask you if you might want to answer that, having been a part of Challenge for Change and Studio D, and really made asking the audience and talking to them about the films such a part of the process.
Yeah, well,
The film was the beginning, not the end.
I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah, well, you just said it.
Sorry.
That was the whole idea that I think that's what we did was, particularly Studio D, was bring the films, have the process continue in interacting with the audience that saw them and use them. How to integrate that process into, well, I mean, I guess that's what DVD extras was supposed to be. It's obviously not in the feature films that we see, but I think that there are more and more documentaries that use the internet that way, that have kind of continuing conversations with feedback and with impact. I know that thischangeseverything.org is their website following the book and the film is full of events and happenings that are not well covered in the mainstream media, that are more and more examples of how the movement is spreading and the other things that are happening. So we certainly have the technology to do what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm. But again, I just want to emphasize that this was such a big part of the NFB process that the filmmakers themselves insisted upon. Okay, yes, we'll make a film, but then we have to go with the film and go out into the community and ask people what they think about the film and what do they want from our filmmaking practices and what have they learned and what do filmmakers have to learn. And that's been a big part of documentary culture in Canada, which is why our documentary festivals across the country are so successful and why so many of you came out today on a Friday morning. How wonderful. So thank you to the audience for engaging with us.
That was a good wrap. No, I always wanted to say that I've learned more about the films that I've made after I've made them and hearing back from audiences.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so wonderful. Thank you all. So both Candy and Maya's film are showing tonight. Bonnie Sherr Klein's Not a Love Story is on at 2:30, and you'll be happy to know there's a Q&A following the screening. And I'll be back up on stage with Bonnie and my book about Not a Love Story. So the conversation never stops, and that's a good thing. So thank you all for coming out, and Steve has something to say. Wonderful. Yes, thank you. Harold's film is screening tomorrow and again on Sunday. Strongly urge you all to see these films. They are amazing. Every single one of them. Every single one of them. Thank you all. And thank you again.